Hello, Hyde family. This is Mrs. Kitchen. I'm really sad that I'm not able to be with you today for our Later in Me night that we had planned, but I still wanted to share with you some thoughts that I had about Habit 5, Seek first to understand, then be understood. This is a habit that has really helped me change my life, and so I wanted to share some things that I've learned about it that will hopefully help you and your family. So I found this really awesome quote. It's technically a proverb. It's an Amish proverb, and it says, instead of putting others in their place, put yourself in their place. And I think that's interesting because a lot of times we think if we're putting someone in their place that we're telling them where they should be, what lane they should be in. But we really don't know what's going on with them. And until we understand what's going on with them, we can't really put them in their place because we're not able to help someone if we don't know where they are in the first place. So I found this awesome article from the Harvard Business Review. The source is down below, and the article is called What Great Listeners Actually Do. So I pulled out a few key points from each section of the article that I'd like to share with you. The first thing that I thought was really interesting was this quote. It says, asking a good question tells the speaker the listener has not only heard what was said, but that they comprehended it well enough to want additional information. So in order to be a good listener, you have to be showing that you're comprehending what people are saying by asking good questions, and that helps someone feel like they're being heard. The next point that I thought was really interesting is this. It says, good listening is consistently seen as a two-way dialogue rather than a one-way speaker versus hearer interaction. The best conversations are active. So if we find ourselves just sitting passively and not asking questions, or if we find ourselves ranting and not asking for feedback, we're neither being a good listener or a good hearer. Because if we want to understand, we need to have conversations so that we can ask those questions and get more information to understand where the person is coming from. The next section talked about what kind of an environment is needed for listening and understanding to be facilitated. The first point says the best listeners made the conversation a positive experience for the other party. So when you're listening, if you go in very defensively, you're automatically going to throw off the person who's wanting to speak to you. So always make sure that you are having a positive attitude when you go into any conversation. I know that's super hard. I know it's not always possible, but honestly, it is the best way for us to make sure that we are being good listeners. The second point is that good listeners made the other person feel supported and conveyed confidence in them. So instead of belittling someone or berating them or telling them what we think of them and why we think they're horrible, helping them understand that they do have good qualities, helping them understand that we have confidence in them to be able to change or to do what they know they need to do. Because usually when someone is coming and talking to us about something, they're needing feedback. So if we explain how the situation is just so out of reach and there's no way you can figure out what to do, that's not really helping as a listener. You need to make sure that you're tapping into that person's strengths, and that takes time sometimes. So part of listening is taking that time. And then the last point, good listening was characterized by the creation of a safe environment. So what does that look like and feel like to you? What is a safe environment? To me, a safe environment is one where I don't feel threatened, where I'm able to be myself. I'm able to share opinions without the fear of backlash. It's a place where I know that other people have my best intentions at heart. So how do we do that at home? Are we making sure that children feel safe to share with us? I know that that's something that we always talk about in education. Our classrooms should be a place where students can share and listen and learn. So how do we do that in our homes? It's a little bit different because we have a different dynamic there, but I also know that it's doable. And what's best for my family might not be what's best for your family. So that's something that you would need to talk as a family about. How can you create a safe environment? The next section talked about disagreeing and how to handle those types of things when you're listening. So the first point was feedback should flow smoothly in both directions, with neither party becoming defensive about comments the other one made, meaning you are assuming good intent. I think that's really important in general in life. Assume good or positive intent. In my experience, most people aren't trying to be rude or unkind. They have other things going on. In my experience, especially with children, most of their behaviors honestly don't have anything to do with me. It has to do with something that they're not sure about or that's outside of their control. So when your husband or wife comes home from work and they're upset, it usually doesn't have to do with you. I mean, it could, and then they'll probably let you know, but a lot of times I know when I'm not in the best mood and my husband comes home and I say something short to him, it honestly has nothing to do with him. It has to do with something else. And so we need to make sure that, first of all, we're in a place where we can be willing to say, hey, I'm sorry I snapped. I just had a really stressful day. This is what was going on. But also we need to be in a mindset that is, okay, everything this person is going to say is meant to help me instead of harm me. And I think that kind of goes back to that safe environment as well. The second point here is that good listeners may challenge assumptions and disagree, but the person being listened to should feel the listener is trying to help, not wanting to win an argument. So in my opinion, and something that's really helped me, as soon as I notice that a conversation is starting to become an argument, I tend to back out of it. I'm still learning how to do this the best way. Usually I'll just stop talking and I'll say, I'm sorry, I can't continue this right now. Can we continue it later when I'm more calm? I would love to be able to just keep my calm and help the situation not escalate to an argument, because an argument is never going to be productive. It's not going to help us solve anything. So make sure that when you're listening and you're giving that feedback, it's all about what is best for that person, not necessarily what you would do or what you want for them. Does that make sense? Hopefully. This next section is about feedback. So it says, good listening invariably includes some feedback provided in a way others would accept, and that opened up alternative paths to consider. And I love that little phrase, and I'm sorry that I keep saying I love that little phrase that says, in a way others would accept. So the way that I talk to one of my second graders is going to be vastly different from the way that I would talk to my teen teacher. And that's going to be different from the way that I would talk to my husband. And that's going to be different from the way that I talk to my mother. We need to make sure that the way that we're giving feedback, and that means needs, wants, and suggestions. So it has to be a way that others would accept. So for instance, if I went up to my husband and I started whining to him and asking him for food, that's not acceptable. First of all, I'm an adult, but also my husband's not going to accept that from me because he knows who I am. It is perfectly acceptable for a 2-year-old who's overwhelmed to do that. It's not going to make us feel happy, but that's acceptable for that person to display that behavior. If we know that someone doesn't appreciate certain phrases or words, we should avoid them. If we know that somebody doesn't want our opinion at all unless they ask, we don't give it to them, or we ask them first. Things like these, just considering the way that other people would be willing to accept what we have to give back. The second point says, someone who is silent for the whole conversation and then jumps in with a suggestion may not be seen as credible. And I think that's because a lot of times when somebody is just totally quiet, you start to wonder if they're really listening to you or if they're thinking about what they want to say next. And if I start to feel like somebody's thinking about what they're going to say next, I tend to shut down because I'm like, okay, just get it out so that you can listen to me. And I don't really want to continue the conversation because I don't feel like they're focused on what I need. And so trying to make sure that we're giving that feedback is important, because what this found is that if you're silent, it might seem that you're not credible. And then the last point says, someone who seems combative or critical and then tries to give advice may not be seen as trustworthy. So that kind of goes back to that safe environment. Are we trustworthy? Do we do what we say? Do we act the way that we know people would accept? That's part of being trustworthy. If you give advice that you aren't willing to try or follow, or that you aren't willing to say, I'm not that good at, are people going to listen to you? Nobody can be perfect at everything. We can be perfect at some things, but we're not going to be perfect at everything in our life. So making sure that when we give advice, we're not coming off as being better than someone, I think is really important. And that kind of also goes along with being vulnerable and being willing to admit that we make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. If you ask one of my second graders, they will gladly tell you all the times in math that I have messed up, for which I'm very grateful, because I love that they are paying attention enough to correct me, because that shows me that they're listening. So being vulnerable, being trustworthy, making sure that we are thinking about how others would accept our feedback is vital when we are having a discussion and listening and talking to someone else. So, if you would like to, now is the time when you can pause this video, and I would love for you guys to have a family or a partner talk time. And I want you to think about these 3 things, and obviously we won't be able to share our ideas unless you want to share in the comments wherever this is posted. But the first question that I have for you is, when is it really important to listen to each other? So children, when is it really important for you to listen to your mom and dad? Mom and dad, when is it really important to listen to your children? And there are going to be lots of times. So think about that. When is it really important to listen to each other? The second question is, how does it make you feel when you aren't listened to? And this could be different for different people, and that's why it's important that we talk about this. I know that my husband has shared with me that when he feels I'm not listening to him, he gets really annoyed with me. When I feel like he's not listening to me, I get really sad and depressed. So even though it's the same behavior that's being shown, we react in different ways. So it's important for us to make sure that we understand how the people around us feel when they think that they're not being listened to. And then the third question is, what can you do to make sure you listen to all family members better? So children, how can you listen to your brothers and sisters better? How can you listen to your mom and dad better? Parents, how can you listen to your children better? How can you listen to each other better? Because the more we have communication in our families, the better our homes are going to feel, because we're using that leadership habit to help us create that safe environment. So go ahead and pause and then answer these questions, and I'll be back in just a second. All right, so now let's play a game. These are really fun family dinner conversation cards that I found for free on a website called Playtivities, and I will try and link this down in the comments or the dialogue box or whatever, wherever this is posted, so that you can go and grab these if you want to print them. I've only added a few of them here because I'd really love for you to just go and grab them yourself. But first, I need you to decide who is going to answer the question first, and then I'll ask these questions, and you can pause in between them until the very end of the presentation. So let's go. Here's the first one. So do you know who's going to answer first? That's the first question. And then here's the question for that person. If you could have only one of your senses, which one would you have? And you might want to follow up with why. If parents could switch places with kids for a day, and kids would switch places with parents, what would your day look like? What is the one thing you wished you had discovered? Name 5 things you would take to a deserted island. Why? If you could be anybody, who or what would you be? If you could have one superpower, what would it be? What was the favorite, how about I start that over? Excuse me, how about I start that one over? What was your favorite gift you ever received? If you would plan a fun family day, what would you include in your plans? What does your dream room look like? Describe yourself in 5 words. How old would you like to be? Why? What makes you happy? What are you good at? How do your parents describe you in 3 words? Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope as you went through those questions, you were able to use some of those tips that I shared at the beginning of the presentation. I really hope that this information is helpful to you and your family. And go grab those other cards, because I think this would be a great time for us to use those and practice our listening skills, because we've got all this time on our hands. So stay safe and have a wonderful evening. Thanks, Beagle Leaders.